Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
My parents sued me because I refused to hand over my new truck to my brother. They lost the case, got hit with my legal fees, and when my cameras caught my brother slashing my tires in revenge, I let the police teach him what deserve really means. Hey, Reddit. My parents spent my whole life treating my brother like royalty and me like free labor. So I said screw it, built my own life, and finally got something that was mine. Turns out they weren't ready to let that go. Before everything exploded, here's how it all started. My name is Tyler Hayes, early 30s, heavy equipment mechanic and crane tech. I spend most of my life out on job sites in the middle of nowhere, running machines that weigh more than houses, and doing shifts long enough to forget what day it is. My family's back in Tulsa, Mark and Lisa Hayes, and my younger brother Blake, the permanent favorite. The dynamic is simple. I work, Blake receives. They never said it out loud, but it never needed saying. After years of living out of suitcases, eating whatever I could heat on a steel counter, and stacking almost every check I earned, I finally did something for myself. I bought the truck I'd been planning for longer than I ever planned anything in my personal life. A 2022 Chevy Silverado RST, dark blue, clean lines, everything exactly how I wanted it. Not a single inch of it came from anyone but me. I walked into the dealership, signed the papers, and drove it out feeling like I'd finally crossed a line I'd been chasing since I was 18. I still kept my old beater sedan, mostly for work weeks and days when I did not want anything touching the Silverado. It rattled, smelled like dust, and spilled coffee, and the radio worked only when it felt motivated, but it always started. The truck was for me. The beater was for everything else. When I finally got a stretch of days off, I pointed the Silverado toward Tulsa. I rent a small duplex on the south side of Tulsa, close enough to swing by my parents' place, far enough to breathe. I pulled into my parents' driveway late afternoon. The sun hit the paint just right, making that dark blue glow. I hadn't even shut the truck off when the front door opened and Blake stepped out. Hoodie, slides, hair messy, like he'd rolled out of bed at the crack of noon. His eyes went straight to the truck, locked on, no blinking. "Oh, damn," he said, walking toward it with that grin he uses when he wants something. "So when you letting me take it out?" There it was. Not admiration, not congratulations. Just the same entitled tone he's had since he learned how to ask for things without earning them. He circled the truck like he was doing an inspection he had authority for. I leaned against the door and answered with a dry, flat tone. "Yeah, right after I hand you my PIN number." He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. I made sure the energy in my voice didn't leave any room for imagination. He kept circling anyway, eyes going over every detail like he was planning upgrades for something that didn't belong to him. He reached for the handle. I hit the lock with the remote before he touched it. "Relax," he said, acting offended. "I was just going to check out the inside. You can check it out from exactly where you're standing." He blinked, confused for a second, like his brain couldn't process a boundary. To him, my stuff was always just temporary storage until he felt ready to claim it. The Silverado wasn't going to be one of those things. Mom stepped onto the porch, smiling too wide, doing her usual cheerleader routine for Blake. Dad followed her out, hands on his hips, scanning the truck from the stairs. Blake looked back at them, trying to get some kind of backup for his big brother shares everything act. "Looks expensive," Dad said. Not impressed. Judging. "Looks earned," I answered. Blake shrugged like he was the one allowing the purchase. "Yeah, it's cool. You know I'd look good in it too." "Good thing you'll never find out," I said. That wiped the smirk off his face for half a second. Then he switched to the fake laugh mode again, the one where he pretends he's not bothered so he can circle back later and try another angle. Blake doesn't drop things. He stores them. Mom came down the steps and hugged me, talking too fast about how busy they'd been and how Blake was just teasing. Dad kept staring at the truck like he was calculating its usefulness for somebody who wasn't me. I knew that look. I'd seen it every year I came home with new work boots or tools, anything I'd earned on my own. It was the look that said, "How long until this belongs to your brother?" Blake stepped beside me again. "Seriously, though, you gotta let me drive it at least once. Like a christening or something." I gave him a half smirk. "Yeah, the day you pay one bill in my life." He didn't like that answer. He didn't say anything back either, which told me he'd pocketed the moment for later. As the sun went down and they kept trying to joke their way into the truck, that familiar pressure settled in. The same pressure that always came with walking through this door. The expectation that I'd fold the way they taught me to. The same old weight waiting to tighten as soon as Blake wanted something. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't need to. But I knew this visit wasn't going to stay quiet for long. I grew up in a house where the rules weren't written anywhere, but everyone knew them. My dad, Mark Hayes, was an ex-Army NCO who believed volume solved everything. He'd bark orders in the kitchen like he was running drills on a parade field. It didn't matter if it was chores, grades, or the way you breathed. If something annoyed him, he turned it into a lesson. Mom, Lisa, didn't yell. She weaponized disappointment. She could turn any situation into your fault, even if you weren't in the room when it happened. Her favorite lines were things like, "Do you want to see your father upset?" Or, "You know Blake looks up to you?" She said it in a soft voice that made you feel like you were failing some invisible test. Between the two of them, the system was airtight. I started working early because nobody ever told me not to. By 10, I was mowing lawns around the neighborhood. By 13, I had a paper route I ran before school. At 16, I was moving freight in a warehouse after class, stacking pallets while other kids were stacking college brochures. None of that surprised anyone. Work was just what I did. If anything, Dad criticized me for not doing more. Blake, meanwhile, didn't have to do anything. If he forgot homework, Mom blamed the teacher. If he broke something, Dad blamed childhood energy. If he lied, they blamed his creative mind. And if he screwed up majorly, which happened often, they blamed whatever they could grab. The weather, his mood, his friends, me. He totaled a go-kart in the backyard once, smashed it into the fence because he thought drifting on damp grass was a good idea. Instead of consequences, Mom took him out for ice cream to calm him down. I spent the next weekend replacing fence boards and straightening the frame of the go-kart with tools I paid for myself. Blake walked around telling people he fixed it. Another time, he stole a neighbor kid's bike, repainted it, and rode it like he owned it. When the neighbor came to the door, Dad said it was a misunderstanding and wrote a check without looking at me, even though Blake tried to shove the blame onto me right in front of them. Dad didn't blink. Blake was the innocent one. I was the older one. Automatic culprit. School wasn't any different. If I came home with an A, Dad asked why it wasn't an A+. If Blake brought home a C-, they hung it on the fridge like he'd won a scholarship. Mom would say things like, "Blake tries so hard," while staring at me like I was supposed to clap. When I bought my first set of tools at 17, every dollar earned from stacking pallets, Dad said, "Good, now you can fix Blake's stuff too." It wasn't a joke. The expectation was real. My work was family property, and Blake counted as family twice. By the time I graduated high school, I knew exactly how the roles worked. I left for job sites because staying home meant spending my life propping up someone who wasn't even trying to stand. Blake stayed because he didn't have to do anything to survive. They kept him cushioned, protected, praised for existing. I wasn't jealous, not even once. I just didn't understand the point of raising someone who never had to earn anything. Eventually, I learned the truth that explained everything. They didn't raise two sons. They raised one prince, Blake, and one pack mule, me. My job wasn't to succeed. It was to keep Blake comfortable while he floated through life untouched. They never admitted that. They didn't have to. It showed in every chore list, every punishment, every Tyler, help your brother, and every Blake didn't mean it. So when Blake looked at my new truck like it had his name etched in the paint, it wasn't surprising. That was the pattern repeating itself. The difference now was simple. I wasn't 17 anymore, and I wasn't playing my assigned role ever again. 2 days into my visit, Mom texted me saying she wanted a quiet family dinner to catch up. No agenda, no hint of anything. Just a normal meal, supposedly. I knew better, but I went anyway. If nothing else, I wanted to see how long it would take for the real reason to surface. Their house looked exactly the same when I pulled up. Same patchy lawn, same porch light flickering like it had been dying for years. I parked the Silverado in the street instead of the driveway. No point giving Blake another reason to circle it like a stray cat. When I walked in, Blake was already sitting at the table, hoodie, phone in hand, pretending he hadn't been watching the window for my arrival. He looked up with that half-wounded, half-smug expression he'd mastered since childhood. "Hey," he said, tone soft and fragile, like he was recovering from an injury I caused. Mom appeared beside him with plates, smiling too brightly. "We're just glad you made it, honey. It's been too long." Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, sizing me up instead of greeting me. If I didn't know better, I'd think he was preparing to issue orders. Blake stayed quiet, letting the dramatics build. We all sat down. Small talk lasted roughly 30 seconds. They didn't care what I'd been working on or where I'd been assigned lately. They never did. They wanted to get to their point. Mark didn't waste time. "So," he said, leaning back like a judge about to pass sentence, "your brother has been struggling with transportation. His car's been acting up. You know that. I looked at Blake. He gave me a small, rehearsed sigh. Shoulders slumped. Wounded prince mode activated. Dad continued, "You're doing well out there. Good money, good hours, you can manage." Mom's breath hitched like she was warming up her crying routine. She didn't wait for my answer. She went straight into the tears. "Blake just needs something reliable, Tyler. He's had such a hard year. You know how sensitive he is." Blake kept his head down, hands folded like he was praying. Perfect performance. Then Mark said it, clean and direct, like he was stating something obvious instead of demanding something insane. "So we think it's reasonable that you let him take the truck. No buildup, no asking, just the decree." I didn't blink. "No." Mom gasped like I'd slapped the table. Blake's head jerked up. Dad stiffened. I set my fork down. "I paid for it. I'm keeping it. Simple. Final." Mom wiped her eyes. "Honey, please. We're talking about family. Blake needs a leg up." Blake nodded, adding a whisper soft, "It's not forever. Just until I get things sorted." I shook my head. "No. That truck is mine." Dad's face tightened. He swapped to the voice he used when he thought respect was automatic. "Don't be selfish, Tyler. Your brother needs help. You don't need that thing right now. Not like he does." "There's a difference between needing transportation," I said, "and needing someone else's property." Mom sniffed harder. Blake shifted in his seat like he was trying to look as fragile as possible. Dad leaned in, voice low but sharp. "You think you're above this family now? You think because you have a paycheck you get to talk down to us?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, but I'm not handing over a truck I earned because you two can't say no to Blake." Dad's jaw clenched. "He's your brother. Right. Not my dependent." Mom reached across the table like she could grab the decision out of the air. "Tyler, please, for once, do the right thing. There's nothing right about giving him my truck," I said. End of story. Dad tried one more angle, his usual father authority tone. "Watch how you speak in this house. You're forgetting your place." I gave him a small, cold smirk. "My place is behind my own steering wheel." Blake's face twisted. He wasn't used to me shutting things down without a negotiation. He muttered, "You always think you're better than me." "No," I said. "I think I work harder than you." Big difference. Dad pushed back from the table, tapping his fingers like he was deciding whether to yell or lecture. Mom was already breathing in hiccups. Blake whispered something about not being supported. Mom repeated it louder, framing it like evidence. I stood up. "Dinner's over for me." Mom grabbed her napkin like she was preparing for a funeral. Dad tried one last shot. "You're going to regret this attitude." I walked toward the door. "I regret driving over here." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. When I got back to my duplex on the south side of Tulsa, the first thing I did was pull into the driveway, shut the truck off, and pull out the boxes I'd ordered a while back. Driveway and door cameras I'd been meaning to install but never bothered with. That night I mounted them both. Quick, precise, no hesitation. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I knew the pattern. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he didn't let it go. And neither did my parents. 2 days after the dinner, I got a text from my cousin Riley asking if I was coming to Grandma's birthday dinner at Aunt Denise's place. Riley wasn't the type to stir anything, so I took it at face value. Nobody from my immediate family had mentioned it, but that wasn't unusual. They usually delivered information selectively. I showed up right on time. The driveway was full. Cars lined along the curb, porch lights on, voices inside. Looked like a real gathering. I grabbed a store-bought pie from the passenger seat and headed in. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The living room wasn't set up for a birthday. No cake, no decorations, no presents, just chairs arranged in a wide circle. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone sitting stiff, eyes already on me. Grandma wasn't there. Aunt Denise cleared her throat. "Your grandma wasn't feeling up to coming tonight." Sure she wasn't. Then I saw Mark and Lisa standing near the back wall like hosts of a talk show, and Blake slumped in a chair off to the side, hands clasped dramatically, looking like he'd been injured in some tragic event. It wasn't a birthday dinner. It was an ambush. I scanned the room once. Every seat filled. Everyone watching. The setup was obvious. An intervention, except nobody in the room could define what I'd supposedly done wrong. My parents must have told them something dramatic enough to get them all here, though. Mom stepped forward, voice soft and trembling. "Tyler, we're just here to talk as a family." Dad followed with a stern nod, like this was court and he was the judge. "Everyone is concerned about the situation." I looked at Blake, who was staring at the floor like the star of a made-for-TV tragedy. He didn't even look up to sell it harder. That was new. Usually he loved the attention. I took a slow breath. "All right," I said. Let's hear it. Aunt Denise started, rehearsed tone and all. We think your parents are just trying to support both of you. They're worried you're being unnecessarily harsh. Uncle Pat chimed in. Your brother is going through a tough time. He needs stability. A cousin added, he just wants a fair shot. Every person spoke like they'd practiced the lines. Same phrases, same tone, same direction. Blame me, excuse Blake. Mark finally took center position. Your brother needs reliable transportation to get his life on track. You're financially secure. You can afford to share. Mom nodded, fighting tears. We thought you'd understand if you heard it from family, not just us. Blake finally looked up, adding a quiet and perfectly pitched, I'm not trying to take advantage, Ty. I just need help. He said it like I was the unreasonable one, like the truck magically belonged to him unless I defended it. I scanned the room again, faces full of expectation. They were waiting for me to fold in front of an audience. That was the whole point, pressure from every direction. Instead, I straightened up and said loud enough for every person to hear, if you're all here to beg for my truck, line up behind Blake. The answer is still no. Silence. A couple relatives looked away fast, like they'd just realized how ridiculous the setup was. Riley hid a laugh behind their hand. Uncle Pat muttered something into his shirt collar. Mom's face crumpled. Dad's posture stiffened. Blake actually flinched. A little twitch he tried to hide. I kept going. You dragged half the family here to guilt me into giving away something I bought. If you want to help Blake, go for it. Buy him a bus pass, a bike, another car. But my truck isn't on the table. Aunt Denise tried to salvage it. We're just trying to keep peace. Then stop staging interventions for a grown man who refuses to work, I said. That pushed a few people over the edge. My Uncle Ray stood up, clearing his throat. Well, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Cousin Madeline followed. Yeah, I didn't know it was about taking your truck. That wasn't how your mom explained it. A couple others nodded, murmuring. Mom tried to reel them back in. He's twisting it. I cut her off. No twisting. You lied to get me here. You used Grandma as an excuse. I looked around the room again. And you wasted everyone's time. Dad's jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched along the side. We're talking about family responsibility. I stepped toward the doorway. Responsibility doesn't mean surrendering my property because Blake can't handle being an adult. That was it. Nobody tried another speech. Nobody blocked the exit. I walked out, got in the beater sedan I'd driven there, and left the house without looking back. An hour later, while I was back at my duplex, Riley texted me, just so you know, your parents planned that whole thing with Blake. They had talking points written out. A second message came right after. Most of us didn't know what it was really about. They said you were acting unstable. Total lie. I thanked them and set my phone down. The ambush hadn't convinced me to hand over anything. It just confirmed exactly what I already knew. If Blake wanted something, my parents would turn the entire family into tools to get it, and they'd barely try to hide it. The lawsuit showed up on a Thursday morning, dropped in my mailbox like a bad joke. A thick packet, my parents' names at the top, and a list of claims that read like they'd been written by someone who'd never been told no a day in their life. They said there was a family understanding. They said the truck was intended for Blake. They said I was withholding property promised to my younger brother. Nothing subtle, nothing grounded in reality. Just a rewritten version of events where I existed purely as Blake's storage unit. I skimmed the pages, flipped to the signatures, and saw both Mark and Lisa had signed like this was some noble act of duty. Blake's name wasn't on anything. He wasn't dumb enough to put his own signature on a lie. He let them do the heavy lifting while he hid behind his usual victim routine. I didn't bother with shock. I didn't bother with anger. They'd tried guilt. They'd tried an ambush. And now they were trying a legal attack. They were just leveling up the same demand. I called Carter Nguyen, a lawyer one of my coworkers swore by. Guy was mid-30s, sharp voice, sharper eyes. After hearing the story, his first sentence was, "They're out of their minds, but paperwork makes idiots bold. Send me everything." So I did. Carter filed a response, and discovery began. Over the next few weeks, the back and forth warmed up. That's when things got entertaining. My parents had no proof of anything. Not one text, not one email, not one message showing any agreement whatsoever. Because there wasn't one. Their entire case sat on understood expectations, which isn't a legal argument. It's a family excuse. Carter told me, they're fishing for something that doesn't exist. Let them waste their energy. Meanwhile, the cousin leak kicked in. Riley sent me a folder of screenshots from the group chat my parents and Blake had used to orchestrate the ambush. They'd drafted talking points, listed which relatives should say what, and even practiced sympathy lines for Blake. The messages were time-stamped, clear and embarrassing. Then, Riley forwarded the messages Blake had sent privately to a couple cousins. I'm calling dibs on Tyler's truck. He'll fold. Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing. He's got money. He doesn't need it. Hard evidence of entitlement. Hard evidence of planning. Hard evidence that the lawsuit wasn't about fairness. It was about Blake deciding he deserved something. Carter added it to the discovery packet with a smile that said, "This is over already." A few weeks later, after scheduling and document exchange, the deposition started. Blake went first. He arrived dressed like he was auditioning for a commercial about hardship. Oversized sweater, messy hair, dark circles he probably drew on himself. He sat down, sighed dramatically, and started every answer with, "I'm trying my best," or, "This has been so hard on me." When Carter asked him what evidence he had of the so-called family understanding, Blake blinked hard like he was queuing up tears. "It wasn't written," he whispered. "It was emotional. We all just knew." Carter didn't react. "So you have no documentation?" Blake let a tear fall. "Tyler's always been the strong one. I'm the sensitive one. Mom and Dad said they'd make things fair for me. He knows that." I sat across the table, watching the performance like a bad play. The tears slid down, but none hit his shirt. His breathing was offbeat, fake, practiced, predictable. Carter slid a printed screenshot across the table. "Is this your message?" Blake looked. The words were unmistakable. "I'm calling dibs on Tyler's truck." Blake froze, then stammered, "That was a joke." "Understood," Carter said. "And this one?" He slid the next. "Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing." Blake wiped a tear that didn't exist. "Context matters." Carter didn't let him finish. "And this? He'll fold." Even the court reporter stopped typing for half a second. Blake's act cracked. The tears stopped. His jaw tightened. That was the real Blake, entitled and cornered. Next came my parents' depositions. Mark tried authority first, talking like he was giving a motivational speech. He claimed family principles, unwritten rules, and Tyler's obligation as the older son. Carter let him talk until he ran out of breath, then asked, "Do you have any written evidence of this alleged agreement?" Mark stiffened. "It wasn't written. It was understood." Carter nodded slowly. Understood by whom? Mark's silence answered perfectly. Mom tried tears and guilt. She insisted Blake needed a fresh start and that the truck represented balance in the family. She kept looking at me like I was betraying them by sitting still. Carter asked one simple question. "Did you or your husband ever give Tyler any money, loans, or promises regarding this truck?" "No," she whispered. "And did Tyler ever tell you he planned to give the truck to Blake?" "No," she whispered again. By the time my deposition came, their case had already collapsed. I answered Carter's questions plainly. When I bought the truck, how I paid for it, why I kept a second car, and what my parents had demanded. No theatrics, no emotion, no speeches, just facts. When it wrapped, Carter gathered the folders, looked at me and said, "They have nothing, and now we have everything." He was right. Their lawsuit wasn't a legal case. It was a tantrum with paperwork, and it wasn't going to save Blake from the one thing he'd never faced in his life: consequences. A few weeks after the depositions, the courthouse was packed tighter than it needed to be. Mark and Lisa sat on one side, stiff-backed and polished, like they were posing for a church directory photo. Blake sat between them in the same helpless posture he'd used at the ambush. Shoulders slumped, hands folded, lips pressed in a permanent pout. He looked like a kid waiting for a lollipop, not a grown man in front of a judge. I sat with Carter and Nguyen, calm, ready, and bored. When the case was called, Blake launched straight into the performance. He talked about his hard year, his mental strain, his need for stability, and how the truck represented family support. He dropped lines he'd rehearsed, complete with slow pauses like he wanted the courtroom to admire the emotional spacing. My parents backed him up with wide eyes and innocent tones. Lisa dabbed her eyelids every few minutes, the tears barely there. Mark tried to play the reasonable father, talking about family expectations and promises understood between brothers. He didn't look at me once, not even when he explained my duty as the older son. Carter took his turn and dismantled the whole thing piece by piece. No agreement, no documentation, no messages showing any plan to give Blake a truck. Then he presented the screenshots, the group chat planning the ambush, the dibs statements, the guilt manipulation strategy. The judge read each page slowly, like he was waiting for someone to give him a reason not to laugh. Blake tried to interrupt twice. Both times the judge shut him down. When it was over, the judge leaned back and let the silence stretch. Then he delivered the ruling in clean, sharp sentences. Case dismissed with prejudice. Plaintiffs cover my costs and attorney's fees. No evidence of any agreement. Blake's face collapsed. Lisa gasped. Mark's jaw twitched like he was chewing nails. I thanked the judge, shook Carter's hand, and walked out of the courtroom feeling exactly how I expected to feel. Steady, not triumphant. The outcome had never been in doubt. I drove back to my duplex, parking the Silverado in its usual spot. I barely had time to shut the truck door before I heard footsteps behind me. Mark. He came across the driveway with the straight-line march he used to use when he was about to bark orders. No hello, no build-up. He stopped 3 feet away, eyes locked on the keys in my hand. You think this is over? He asked, voice low and shaking. That judge didn't fix anything. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He stepped closer, reaching for my pocket like he could just take the keys the way a parent snatches a toy from a toddler. His fingers brushed the edge of my jeans. I caught his wrist before he could close his hand. Try that again, and you will not like what you keep. And his eyes flicked up, confused for half a second. Then he pulled his hand back fast, like he'd touched a live wire. He stared at me, the realization settling in. Whatever version of me he thought he could intimidate didn't exist anymore. Lisa called his name from the street, voice shaky but trying to sound outraged. Blake was in the passenger seat of their car, watching from behind the window like a kid spying through curtains. Mark held my stare another second, then stepped back. You're a disappointment, he said. Get in line, I answered. He walked off, shaking his head like he'd been wronged. They drove away, Blake craning his neck to get a last look at the truck. I pocketed the keys and went inside. 3 days later, I was doing a routine check on the Silverado. Nothing unusual, just habit. When I crouched under the front end, I noticed something out of place. The wheel speed sensor lead in the front harness had been cut clean. Not frayed, not worn. Someone knew exactly what to slice to strand me later. It wouldn't have killed the truck instantly, but it would have stranded me somewhere inconvenient. Maybe the highway, maybe a job site hours from town. Definitely not an accident. I didn't swear. I didn't rant. I just took out my phone and took pictures from every angle. Then I pulled the footage from the cameras I'd installed before, replaying the last few nights frame by frame. Blake never appeared on camera. Neither did my parents. Whoever did it came up the narrow side yard path along the fence, the one angle my first setup did not cover. I had the front walk and the alley approach, but not that cut through by the trash cans. So I fixed that. I spent the evening redoing the entire setup. New mounts, higher angles, additional coverage over the whole driveway and both sides of the duplex. No gaps, no blind corners, no way to approach the truck without showing up on a lens. When I was done, I wiped my hands, locked the doors, and sat on the couch. I was waiting. Because the pattern was obvious. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he escalated. When my parents didn't get what they wanted, they pushed harder. And nothing about the last week suggested they were done. The morning it happened, the air was cold enough to fog my breath as soon as I stepped outside. I locked the front door, coffee in one hand, work bag in the other. Same routine, same time, same quiet duplex driveway. Then I saw the Silverado. All 4 tires were flattened to the rims. Not deflated, slashed. Straight, deliberate cuts. Whoever did it used a sharp blade and confidence. I didn't walk closer right away. I stood still, taking in the angles of the cuts, the way the rubber peeled outward. No guessing needed. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. I turned around, went back inside, set the coffee down, and pulled up the upgraded camera feed. I fast-forwarded through the night until motion detection kicked in. There he was. Blake. Clear as daylight, hood off, face uncovered. He came in from the side yard path I had just covered, stepped into the driveway with a knife in his right hand, crouched, and slashed the front tire in one quick motion. No hesitation. Then the next. Then the next. He switched hands once, wiped the blade on his sleeve, and kept going. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't even checking the surroundings. He did it like he believed the world was his, and I was still in the role they raised me for. He finished, looked at the truck like he'd accomplished something meaningful, and walked away without looking back. I saved the footage. Then I saved it again to an external drive. Then emailed a copy to myself. 3 versions. No chance of accidental deletion. I grabbed my keys for the beater sedan, backed out, and drove straight to the police station. Inside, I explained the situation to the desk officer. He asked for proof. I handed him the USB. He clicked play. Blake appeared on the screen, slashing tire after tire with the enthusiasm of someone cutting birthday cake. The officer's eyebrows went up. Well, that's clear. Crystal, I said. He called another officer over, who watched it once and nodded. Yeah, we'll open a case. Someone will reach out soon. The report was filed under vandalism and criminal mischief. I signed the papers, provided my contact information, and walked out. No emotion, no drama, just procedure. By the time I got home, Mark and Lisa's car was already parked crooked in the driveway, like they'd rushed over the second Blake realized the police had been notified. They were standing on my porch when I walked up. Lisa started first, voice overly bright. Tyler, honey, we heard something happened. We came to help. Mark nodded, trying a calm expression he didn't own. We want to make this right. Tires aren't cheap. Let us cover it. I walked past them and unlocked the door. Lisa stepped toward me. We can fix this as a family. Mark added, and Blake can take the truck on weekends, just until he gets settled. That way everyone wins. There it was. The trade, the strings attached, the fake peace offering that was really just another attempt to get what they'd wanted from the beginning. I turned to face them. You're not buying weekends with my property. That game is dead. Lisa's smile cracked instantly. Mark's face tightened. Before either of them could respond, Blake came around the corner of the house. He must have been listening the whole time. His expression flipped between shock and fury, realizing the plan had failed and I wasn't bending. You called the cops on me? He snapped. You slashed my tires, I said. What did you think was going to happen? He stepped forward, hands shaking. You're seriously doing this? Over a truck? Over my property being vandalized by a grown man who should know better. Lisa rushed to Blake's side like he'd been stabbed. He's upset. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mark jabbed a finger toward me. This doesn't have to go further. Withdraw the report. We'll handle it in the family. It's already filed, I said. And it's staying filed. Blake's jaw tightened. His eyes went sharp. The victim act collapsing. You're ruining my life. No, I said. You're ruining your own. He glared at me with a mix of humiliation and something close to panic. He wasn't used to consequences approaching from the front door. They didn't say goodbye when they left. They just got in the car, slammed the doors, and peeled out like teenagers caught shoplifting. An hour later, the call started. Blake first, crying, rambling, begging. Then yelling, insulting, threatening, then crying again. I didn't answer a single one. I let the voicemail fill up. When the last call came in, I picked up just long enough to deliver one line. You wanted my attention. Congratulations. You got the kind that comes with a case number. Then I hung up. On the drive back from the station, I called the shop that outfits our site trucks. They had a matching set in stock and held them for me. I swung by in the beater, loaded the rubber, and headed home. By evening, I had the tires replaced, one by one, with a torque wrench and a quiet mind. After that, I went inside and upgraded the cameras again. 2 more angles, tighter coverage, infrared, automatic backups to cloud and external. When the system rebooted, I scrolled through the settings, checked every feed, and clicked Save. Then I blocked all 3 numbers, Mark, Lisa, and Blake. Calls, texts, everything, gone. The next morning, I took the paperwork and filed for a no-contact order. Clean, simple, legal, final. By the time I returned home and stepped out into the driveway, the air was quiet. The Silverado sat on new tires. Cameras pointed from every angle, the morning damage replaced with clarity. I stood there for a moment, not to admire anything, but to acknowledge something simple. They didn't lose a truck fight. They lost the right to reach into my life ever again. And this time, they understood it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.